It was good. No, it really was. It was good. I mean, in that, it's hard sometimes, depending on our background, to think about Jesus as being present and not just someone who talked about things, but actually being present, that actually has authority, can do things, not just say things, but to do things. And there aren't many other people that we think about like that. Like, we don't think about like the presence of Napoleon or Julius Caesar or something. So it is kind of a different way to think about somebody. So it can often take a little time to actually even think that way, let alone expect for something to happen like that. And that's really my personal experience too. I wasn't raised even in any kind of formal religious environment. So when I started hearing people talk about Jesus, I thought of him like I would think of like Julius Caesar, or I don't know, like Plato or Aristotle. Like, this seems like someone that would be interesting to read about or to think about. And actually the first kind of, I told you guys a number of weeks ago, at Engage, the first kind of meeting type thing where they talked about Jesus, I went there just to get a Bible, because I wanted to read about Jesus. And I didn't tell you this part of it, but at that same night, the guy did this kind of talking thing about Jesus, which didn't make a lot of sense, sort of like now, where people talk to you about things. And I didn't really understand what was going on. And there was only one line that he said of that whole time talking that stuck out to me. One thing he said. And he said, and again, he talked for like a half hour. And I remembered one line. And the one line was, he said, everything that is in the dark will be brought to the light. And everything that we've thought in our hearts will be shouted from the rooftops. And he said, and that's what Jesus says. And that Jesus has a weird ability to see through people. That was it. That's the only thing I remember. I don't have any idea what he was saying. To this day, I don't think I understood that night even. He said, Jesus has an ability to see through people. He can see our hearts. He can see what we're thinking about. He can see what we're afraid of. He can see what brings us joy and life. And I don't know, I mean, if I say that to you right now, Jesus can see through you, how does that make you feel? How it made me feel was terrified. My thought was, if God can see through me, that's really bad. Like, I don't know, I mean, it sounds silly now when I say it out loud, but I had never actually considered that God could see me. I don't know why I'd never thought of that. I just sort of thought he can only sort of see what I want him to see, I guess. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I'd actually never formulated the thoughts that he can see all of me. And that one thought terrified me. It was scary to me. And I remember trying to like get rid of it. Like, this is all hocus pocus, weird stuff anyway. I just want to read about Jesus. And so I got this Bible and I was reading it. And it was a long time after that, I was reading from this guy named Paul, who was a guy who had decided to follow Jesus and then was helping people meet Jesus. And I read one part of Paul writing because that really changed everything. Because I'd read about Jesus interacting with people, and actually it was interesting that one thought helped me read about Jesus. Because I noticed that in the Gospels and in the different writings about Jesus, he did this to people a lot. Like, he'd look at them and they would be asking him a question about something else, and he would just say, well, I see you. Let me answer the real question. Have you ever done that? Have you ever asked like a question intellectually, thinking you want to know something, and then someone looks at you and says, let me tell you what the real question of your heart is. So I started reading that in the Gospels, where like a religious guy comes to Jesus, a guy named Nicodemus, and Jesus looks past his questions and says, I can see you. I see something inside of you. There's a real question of your heart. He does it also to a woman at a well who is asking him about religious things, and he says, I can see you. I see that the real question of your heart is if you'll ever be loved. And you've sought love from different men, but actually, I'm the one you seek. And then he does it again to another guy who's sick. And he says, really, the problem of your life is not that you're sick, not that your body doesn't work right, but that, well, you've given up on life. You've made yourself into a victim, and you don't feel like your life can count for anything. And this guy thought he needed his body to be made well. And Jesus says it's actually your heart that needs to be made well. And I noticed that all the time in the Gospels, Jesus did that to people. Almost every person he talked to. He did it to a guy who is very rich, very wealthy young man who comes and starts asking Jesus some religious questions. And Jesus looks at him and says, your problem is of your heart, that you think you'll be made well by the things that you accumulate, the things that you have. But I tell you, if you give all that up and follow me, you'll be set free. And so I've been reading that in the Gospels. And then I got to this part where Paul's writing about Jesus in Romans chapter 7, where Paul is talking about himself. And he says, the things that I want to do, I cannot do. And the things I don't want to do, I keep on doing those things. Make sense? Like, there's things I know I'm not supposed to do, and for some reason, I keep doing those things. And I kind of lie, and I pretend like they're not happening to other people. And then there's things that I know I'm supposed to do that I don't get done. I never quite get there. And what's funny is he's coming off a section where he's talking about that he's a good religious guy, and he can trick most everybody. Because he can do things on the outside that make people think he's okay. Probably no one here does that. We all are just perfect. But when I read it, and I saw it, it was the first thing that actually reading in the Bible made sense to me. And I went, that's true. I don't know what else any of this other stuff is about. Jesus doing this random stuff. I don't know what's going on, but that is true. And that's my problem. And I thought, if there's any way that can change, I want that to change. I want somehow to be able to change from the inside. And I read the next little part that Paul wrote. He said, therefore now there is no condemnation for those who are in Jesus, because the Spirit of life has set me free from the law of sin and of death. I can be free because I've met Jesus. I bumped into Jesus, and he's changed something from the inside. And it was a crazy moment for me. It's one that I really can't explain. I mean, have you ever had moments that you try and explain with words, but it doesn't quite work because it was so strong? That's like this moment for me. So I'll try my best to explain what happened to me. But what happened was, I had the strange feeling that I wasn't investigating Jesus anymore. He was investigating me. It wasn't like I was reading the Bible anymore. I could tell the Bible was reading me. And I had this strange experience that felt like there were eyeballs in the ceiling. I know it doesn't make sense, but I felt like someone was looking at me and asking me a question. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I remember it being so strong. It was in the middle of the night. I was reading in my room alone at night because my parents didn't know Jesus, were not religious people, and so I would kind of hide to read the Bible. And it was the middle of the night, and it was so strong that I remember actually looking up to the ceiling like this. Like someone's looking at me. And I dropped down to my knees in the middle of my room, and I said, if you can change this, I'll give you my whole life. You can have everything. And in that moment, something happened that I still don't know how to explain. It was the room filled with warm Jell-O. Okay, now it didn't actually fill, but it felt like there was this warm liquid in the whole room, and I was breathing it in and breathing it out, and I just cried and cried and cried, and I couldn't stop crying. I actually literally thought to myself, I'm having a nervous breakdown. I'm losing my mind. I'm going crazy. I'm going to end up in a mental institution. I mean, I'm thinking things like this. So I stood up and I went, okay, come on. Come on. And I went and I stood in the shower, and I'm leaning against the shower. This is like 3 a.m. I'm leaning against the shower, crying in the shower. And I was like, okay, just go to bed. It'll wear off. Whatever's happening will wear off. And I laid in bed, waiting for it to wear off, fell asleep, and I would wake up in the morning. I woke up in a few times in the middle of the night crying because something was happening to me. Something that I, to be really honest, wasn't sure I wanted to happen to me was happening. And I knew somehow in that moment that because I'd opened up a door in my life, Jesus was doing something to me. I didn't have a way to explain it. I actually didn't tell anybody. That's how weird it was. I was scared to tell anyone because I thought they would think I was crazy. The only person I told was the guy that took me to this meeting, where I heard the thing about Jesus seeing through you. And he went, oh my gosh, are you sure you're okay? Like, even he thought I was crazy. So then I was really scared. So, I just tried to shut my mouth. But from that moment, it changed something. What's helpful for me, which helped me to believe I wasn't completely crazy, is I see the exact same thing happen to people in the Bible. And I bumped into people who have had the same thing happen to them, where when you come to the place where you not just see that the teaching of Jesus is interesting, and as you try to live it, you start to have the sinking suspicion that there's something or someone hanging around. You don't really know what's happening, but you know something's happening. And when you start to become aware of that this person or thing or eyeballs or whatever it is for you, you have this sense that someone's looking at you. You have a couple choices. You have to make some decisions in a moment like that. When you have a moment and a sense that someone's looking through you, you really, as far as I can tell, now there's probably lots of different options in here, but there's two kind of main options. And one option is to try and clean up and perform and do a good job because you know you have to do something. This would be kind of the religious option. When you know that there's a God who's out there somewhere, who's trying to do something with you, you feel like, okay, come on, gotta make this happen. I don't know if you've ever been even in your household, how your family worked. But I don't know if you ever had that weird feeling as a kid that your parents could see through you. Do you ever have that feeling? You never did? I did. I remember coming home late at night once. I was supposed to be home at a certain time. I came home late, and both my parents are sitting there waiting for me. One light on, waiting. And in that moment, you can tell, okay, I've got two options right now. I either tell the whole deal. I say, okay, I'm late, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, or you just start. You got to do something. You got to make a way to survive this moment. You have to come up with a better story than whatever they're going to say. You know what I mean? You have to posture yourself. What's interesting is in the Bible, in the New Testament, when you watch Jesus interact with people, people generally choose one of two things. When they really get to the sense, not just that he's teaching them, but that he sees them, they do one of two things. They either kind of distance and try and perform, or they find themselves open and exposed. And as far as I can tell, the only difference between those two options is how you think he sees you. How does he feel when he sees you? I think that's really the only difference is he generally kind of upset and he's come to like beat you up? Or does he see you to free you, to heal you, to help you, to encourage you? And that makes all the difference in the world. And what's really weird is the people that have the hardest time responding to Jesus with their hearts open are the religious people. Are the people that have already built up a whole bunch of ways that you're trying to do things the right way, and they can't quite get it. And when they have the sense that Jesus is looking at them, they kind of go back into that mode and try a lot harder. Does this make sense? This could be a helpful grid for you when you read the Gospels even. You'll see people respond different ways to Jesus in a moment when they know that he sees them. Not just what he's saying is interesting, but he sees them. I was on a plane flying one place to another. It doesn't even matter. But I'm on this plane, and so I'm like this pastor guy who leads a church, and I'm supposed to do this stuff all the time, I guess. You're supposed to, people imagine if you're a pastor that you like pray all the time and all you do is think about Jesus and you just probably carry a Bible with you at all times. But that's actually not true. Maybe it's true of like real pastors. Maybe I'm not a real pastor. But for me, I like to kind of like veg out. I like watching basketball or just reading or just sleeping, really. So I'm on this plane, and really the only thing I'm thinking is, oh man, this is going to be great. It's going to be quiet. I'll just sort of listen to music and fall asleep. I don't know if you sleep on planes, but there's something about planes that just rock me to sleep. It's like a womb or something. I don't know. It's the whir of the, I don't know what it is, but I can just fall asleep as soon as I'm on a plane. So I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm like planning ahead. So I get on the plane and I sit down and I put my headphones in and I start my iPod, and I'm just sort of, you can kind of pull the edges around, and I'm leaning, settling in, and I notice somebody sits next to me, and sorry. And as soon as he gets on the plane, he opens his bag and he pulls out a Christian book. He's reading this Christian book on determining God's will for your life. And I look at it and I'm like, oh man, I'm probably supposed to talk to him. Because I'm like a pastor and he's like this Christian guy, and nah. So he kind of jostles me on accident, actually, as he's doing his bag. And he goes, I'm sorry. And I go, I didn't hear what he said. I took my headphones out. I go, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. He goes, I'm like totally sorry I bumped into you. I go, no, it's okay. It's fine. And then he just starts in. He goes, so like, where are you headed? And what are you even up to? I'm like, oh, no. This is not good. We do not want to do this. And I go, well, I've just been at this thing. I've been like teaching and stuff. And he goes, teaching, so you're like a teacher. Yeah. And I'm like trying to put my headphones back in. He's like, so what have you been teaching about? Oh, Jesus. Things about Jesus. He goes, oh, wow. So you're a Christian. And he has this book. He goes, have you read this book? And I'm like, actually, I really don't like this book. I read about 50 pages of it and I thought it was terrible. And I go, well, yeah. He goes, isn't it great? Yeah, it's all kinds of books. And, I'm like trying to not offend this guy and sort of this conversation. And I'm starting to have this sense that I need to like talk to this guy about his life, but I don't really want to. So finally I'm like, all right, fine, we'll talk about this. So I take my headphones out, and his name's Harry. I said, so Harry, like, tell me about what you love about Jesus. What do you love about Jesus? And he goes, what? I said, well, you say you're a Christian, but like, what do you love about Jesus? I mean, it's nice that you're a Christian, but what do you love about Jesus? What about him? And he goes, well, in 87, I went to, I can't remember the exact date, but he said something like this, in 87, I went to a Billy Graham crusade, and I went up and I said, I'm going to become a Christian. And so that's when I stopped smoking pot and blah, 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 blah. And he goes through this whole deal. It goes through his whole story from 87. And then I started a business, and I'm in the Christian Businessman's Association. And I just love, praise God, I love God. Okay, cool, man. Well, I'll let you get back to your book. And I go to put my headphones back in. And, have you ever just been bothered by something and you're just ignoring it? So I'm bothered by it. I just didn't like his answer very much. And so I'm listening to my music, and then finally I'm like, oh, come on, all right, fine. So I take my headphones out, and I said, Harry, can I be really honest with you? We'll probably never hang out ever again. So can I just be honest with you? He goes, sure. I go, I did not like your answer very much. And he went, you didn't? I said, no. I thought it was very unhelpful. I said, why? I said, because I asked you what you love about Jesus, and you told me about something from 1987. That's really strange. And pretty much what I think you told me was how you joined a religion and it helped you. And that's cool, I guess. People join all kinds of things that help them. Religions or groups or clubs or counseling things or whatever. And that's nice. But I asked you about Jesus. And I think it was weird. He goes, well, what do you mean? So what do you think it means to become a Christian? I go, I don't really care about what it means to become a Christian. I asked you about Jesus. And so we're kind of going back and forth. And so I gave him an illustration. I said, if I told you, how's your marriage? And you said, well, I was married 25 years ago, and it was a great wedding, and we had little snacks, and all our friends were there. I would know something's wrong with your marriage. I'm concerned that maybe you don't really have a life knowing Jesus. And he went, what are you talking about? And he's actually getting offended. Because he's a really smart guy. He's a successful businessman. So we start going back and forth, and I'm drawing on some napkins, and we're opening the Bible, and we're reading the Bible together. Specifically John 15, about what it means to really know Jesus, to have a sense of his presence, his person, to know that he can see you and you're living life with him. And he's confused, and I think I'm making it worse. But in the middle of this conversation, I can tell that someone else is listening. On planes, if you've ever had a conversation, do you ever have the sense that other people are listening? Because you're all jammed together really closely. And I can sense that someone's listening from behind us. You know how the seats are, you have a little gap. And I kind of look through the gap in the seats, and there's a girl with her face pressed up to the seats, and she backs up as soon as I look through there, because we're this close. I look in there, she backs up. And so I looked over the seats, and I said, it's okay if you're listening. Do you want to be part of the conversation? She goes, I am so sorry. I just couldn't help but hear you guys talking. It sounded really interesting. I just have, the Sky Mall magazine. I just thought that was more interesting than reading about little gadgets and stuff. So I said, no, feel free, be a part of the conversation. So she's leaning over the seats like this. And we're talking, Harry and I are talking. We're kind of paying attention to her, but not really. She's just kind of watching more than anything. And Harry's like, well, I just don't think that makes sense. I think it's about you join this thing and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's not about a club. Jesus didn't come to start a religion. And we're going back and forth. And in the middle of us talking, completely rudely, it made no sense for the conversation, she blurts out, what if you're a lesbian? And we both freeze, what? And you could tell she was embarrassed, I can't believe I just said this out loud. It was like that, you kind of vomit things out, and you can't believe you just said it. So I go, what do you think, Harry? He goes, I don't know. He's just frozen. And I said, well, what do you think about what we've been saying? She goes, well, I think it sounds really interesting. I just want to know, what if I'm a lesbian? What would you say? Isn't it funny how religious we all are without realizing it? How we have categories for things, we say certain things and we do other things, and so I'm like scared. I'm feeling like this is an important moment, and I don't want to hurt. Yeah, I don't want to mess this up. You ever feel like that? I feel like that most days. And so I said, well, I guess, the question is, do you want Jesus? And she said, well, the way you're talking about it sounds really interesting. I said, you know what? Let me tell you a story about Jesus. There is this party that Jesus is at, and it's a bunch of pastor types that are throwing this party for him, good religious people. And they throw this party, and there's really two types of people. There's people that are trying to perform for Jesus, and there's people that are opening their hearts right where they're at and just saying, this is who I am, and Jesus begins to change them from the inside. I think there's really two types of people. And you got to figure out which type you want to be. Is what I said. Here's a story like that. There's these pastors, and they throw this party for Jesus, and they're really trying to make it nice. It's like, imagine if you had Jesus to a party at your house, especially if you're like supposed to be good religious people. And they throw this party, and I imagine it's really nice, and they give them the right seed, and they're making everything perfect. And in the middle of the party, this lesbian walks in. And everybody knows who she is in the town. It's a small town, and she's crying. And all she can do is fall down at the feet of Jesus and weep. She can't talk. She knows that everyone in there knows she's not supposed to be there. And she's just crying at his feet. What do you think that he did? She goes, I don't know. Did he say, get up? What are you doing here? And I said, no, it's amazing what he did. He actually defended her with all of these men standing around. He took the attention off her and put it on himself. And he said, do you see this woman? What do you think about her? And they didn't know what to think. He said, let me tell you a story. There's two people that owe Visa money. One owes $1 million. The other owes like $10. Visa cancels the debt of both of them. Which one loves Visa more? And of course, the pastors are smart pastors. It's a simple story. They say, well, the one that owed them more money. He said, you see this woman, she's so aware of her debt. And because her debt is canceled, she loves me more. She loves me more than you. See, when she knew that I could see through her, she knew that I was here to free her, not to get her to perform. Make sense? And so I'm crying as I'm telling this story. She's crying. Harry's crying. And I said, so I guess the only question is, will you just come as you are before Jesus? Even in light of all of these other people who might think that there's something you're doing wrong, and will you just open your heart before him? Say, will you take me? And I said, and I have a weird feeling that he's with us right now. I think that's why we're crying. It's a nice story, but I think we're all sensing that he's with us. And she said, yep. And so I said, so there you go. And it's so funny. She goes, well, I feel like we should do something. We can't just end. We have like an hour to go on the flight. Like, we should do something. And I said, well, what do you want to do? She said, I don't know. I said, well, I guess we could just like talk to Jesus. We could like acknowledge that he's here, and you tell him what you want to tell him. And in like church world, we call that prayer. And I go, Harry, do you want to lead us? Tell us how to pray? And Harry goes, I can't do anything. That's literally what he says. He's just coming apart. Here's what's so powerful. She reaches over the seat, puts her hand on his shoulder, and goes, it's okay. She says, Jesus, would you help Harry? I came apart. Like, I am weeping. And then she just starts praying. Says, Jesus, I want all you have for me. And I feel like that woman. I feel so embarrassed about my life. I feel like there's never been room for me. And if what this guy's told me is true, I give you my whole life. And I'm crying. She's crying, Harry's crying. It was so awkward and so wonderful. So what do you do? What do you do? What do you think when you think that Jesus is looking right into you and through you? Do you throw open the doors of your life? Or do you begin to try and polish up and clean up and react and respond in distance? I would just encourage you, just as even an experiment, to just say, okay, Jesus, I've read about you, I've thought about you, but I want to ask if you would really meet me right where I am.